Welcome to this week's episode of Midlands Gaming Spotlight. Today we're going to be looking at how developers in the region build and create engaging games, with some of the biggest racing developers from our region and some of the biggest indie developers around also being from the area. This is really the episode where we get to just dig in and show you what makes the West Midlands so fantastic and such a huge presence in the gaming industry. Enjoy. We are joined here today by somebody very, very special from one of the biggest indie developers in the region. We've got Gavin Price from Playtonic Games. Gavin, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, you're welcome. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. So, as I just said, you are one of the co-founders of Playtonic Games.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
As well as the studio director and a game director as well.
Yeah, wear of many hats, and the guy who makes sure there's always cake in the kitchen when we, back in the days when we were in an office together, of course.
Yeah, of course. But again, that's always one of the favourite people, isn't it? The people who keeps the fridge well stocked.
Yeah.
As well as that, I believe you worked at Rare for a good number of years and a number of titles as well.
I did, yeah. Started there when I was 19, so it's kind of did a lot of growing up alongside as a person as well as cutting my teeth in game development there. Okay. So, how just to begin with, because you say you work for Rare to begin with, how did you get started at Rare? How did you break into the industry as it was? Obviously, it was a different world back then, but yeah, it was a very different world. Like at the time, I was working on doing a computing course at college, and just looking to take more of a traditional route into the industry to end up with a degree in computing and go on to become, I was hoping to become a programmer at the time. But at that point in time, I was 18, 19, and I was working in a local game store, which was, in a town called Burton-on-Trent, not too far from Rare, and quite a few Rare employees every now and again would pop in to buy their games from us, and I'd always be hounding them, trying to get information out of them. Not to much success, they were so secretive. But the love of games and that kind of common ground between working in a game shop and game developers, coming in, talking to them, they were always very happy to chat. And one of them just mentioned, he said, well, I just kind of applied to see if they had any QA roles going, and I got lucky. He said, why don't you try the same? So I did. Didn't hear anything for a few months, but then I got a response saying, hey, we'd like to come and interview you.
Okay.
And it went, it kind of went well from there. I did the interview, they offered me a job, and all of a sudden I had to go back into college and say to all my college friends and the tutors, I've been given this really big opportunity, I've got to go and do it, sorry. So I'm going to drop off the course and get my foot in the door that way and try and build up from a QA position.
Okay, fair. I mean, I do hear a lot of people these days will start at the bottom and try and work their way from the top, and QA is quite a grueling place to start, but it's also very worth it if you really love games.
Yeah, and back then QA was very different to what it is today. It was an internal QA team, really, really strong team of people who bonded well with each other. There was about 8 of us, and then we had a lead QA, and we were a great group. We worked really well together, and the internal QA process back then was so different to the kind of QA world of the modern take on it. And Rare was always willing to give anyone in QA a chance. If you saw an opportunity to go and progress, and we had people from QA go into audio roles, art roles, even do some software test roles, and myself, design. That happened probably more than any other discipline.
Okay, it's very interesting. So obviously you say you started working in QA, but overall, what was it like working for Rare? Obviously, I presume you have a lot of good memories there, working on some really, really good games.
Incredible memories, and it's such a hard feeling to describe. When I absolutely loved their output from mid-80s onwards, when they were focusing on Spectrum, then NES output, Super Nintendo output, and then I joined kind of midway through their N64 output, I guess. So, I had these guys on a pedestal in my mind, and they were just these gaming godlike people to me, and I was like, this is incredible. And when I turned up and started working there, it took a very long time for me to just stop gazing and staring at where I was and looking at the surroundings and people and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm here.
Just pinch me, I've got to be dreaming, I can't believe I'm here.
Exactly, yeah. It took a long time to sink in, and whatever your opinion or thoughts or, they were so secretive back then, and then there wasn't much really widespread knowledge of people working in the industry. So you kind of, however you preconceived what working on games must be like, I was miles out. I was like, oh, it might be this, I might be doing this and this and that. And then you go in and you go, no, it's nothing like that. We're doing this, this and this. But it was such a fantastic learning experience, such a special moment in time as well.
So I can completely agree with you saying, you held Rare on such a pedestal back then, because that back in the 90s, that was back when I was a young lad, and I did play some of Rare's games back in the day. And even I, just looking back, so they were such perfect examples of the genres they were making. Obviously, GoldenEye, I think it might have been a little bit before when you started, but that was what really kicked off proper first-person shooter games. Banjo-Kazooie and its sequels, massive hit. Conquered by the Third Day became a cult classic over the years.
Yeah, so many great games. And I just remember looking at the credits list of a lot of these games, and then as I was going around the company, learning the faces to these names who had just been looking at scroll past me on, credit screens for so long, and I was like, wow, this is that person. And again, you might sometimes build up a bit of an image in your mind of what these people might be like, and then when you meet them, they're nothing like what you imagined, but they're totally nice in a good way, just not what you expected.
After this, we'll move away from your history at Rare, but really, I want to know what your favourite game to work on while you're at Rare. If you had to pick one, so I'd imagine with all the games you've worked on, there's every single game's the best, but if you had to pick one game, even if it's just a little bit of an inch, it beats everything else by.
I actually find this quite easy to answer. It's Jet Force Gemini. Yeah, that game. It was actually the first game I worked on, and it was my first ever credit in the video games industry. And believe me, everything I worked on, I thought was absolutely fantastic. I loved, and there's some of the games that I really, really have the fondest memories of aren't perhaps the biggest and most well-known of Rare's output. But Jet Force Gemini for me was way ahead of its time. It had that Halo 30 seconds of fun repeated to it, and it had tons of variety, and the effort that went into the AI in that game was incredible. And I just found it a really, really great take on a shooter genre as well. All this bug splat going off everywhere and explosions, and it's not just the fact that it was my first credit, but the game itself as well. I absolutely adore.
So moving on from Rare to where you are now with Playtonic, as obviously one of the co-founders, what was the hardest part of starting Playtonic?
The hardest part was deciding to do the jump. Rare is a great place to work at, and every single year I was there, I really massively enjoyed it. I thought, I'm going to be a 65-year-old man retiring here one day, but then, you kind of see the clock winding down, and you think, well, I had this folder. I remember having a folder on my desktop of game ideas.
Yeah.
And then you look at them and you think, right, actually, if each of those took 2 to 3 years to create, I'm not going to make these things. These things are never going to be made. And it kind of, all of a sudden, you become very aware of your own mortality and think, right, I'll die before all this happens, unless I do something about it. If you really want to go and do these games, and, it's going to mean breaking off and going and doing it and finding a way to do it. So, and that was Playtonic, really. It was right. Let's there's a few like-minded people, I guess, who really did want to work on a certain style of game too. And it was one of those now and nevers, and getting the confidence to go and do it, and leave your comfort zone was by far the most challenging thing to overcome.
Yeah, but, no, definitely.
Yeah, once you do it, never look back and commit to what you're trying to do. And again, don't be afraid of failure. We were expecting we might fail 2 or 3 times at doing this before we get to success. But luckily we we've done well first time around.
Oh yeah, definitely, because Yooka-Laylee was an absolute massive hit. If I remember right, did the company kickstart it?
That's right. Yeah, no, we kickstarted it, and again, we had a plan for how we'd fund a company long term, but what that Kickstarter campaign allowed us to do was just accelerate our plans and keep full control of the company to a small number of individuals. So we were really able to grow it and go in the direction we wanted to, without any external pressures or investors.
Okay, so Kickstarter campaigns can be tricky at the best times to get going. Obviously, yours was a massive success because everyone was like, "Oh my god, it's basically Banjo-Kazooie's coming back but in a different skin," because everyone loved that style of platformer from back in the day. It's it's kind of like a sub-genre of platforming that at the time, and even to a little bit now, is still not as like out there. Like you may see the occasional platformer, but there's nothing quite like the style of games that you guys make and what Rare made back then.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I'm wondering, outside of the Kickstarter, once you actually got cracking on development, what was the hardest part, if there was a part, of developing Yooka-Laylee? Like as a whole, or is there anything that comes to mind that you can think of right away?
There's a ton of things that come to mind. Like I say, so if you imagine a bunch of developers who've come away from a company where you've been using an internal engine, so you have an internal engine team sorting all life's problems out for you. You're only having to focus on one release. You're able to be very secretive about it for a long time. You're not having to do lots of other activities. You have lots of people doing specific roles that you can just focus on. All of a sudden, all that was gone. And we're like, okay, we've got to learn how to use middleware. We've got to learn how to do multiple platforms, which we'd never done before in our lives. We've got to learn how to grow a company. We've got to make sure payroll happens. We've got to do all this kind of business running stuff you never have to do. And you can't do it in secret. You've just done a crowdfunding campaign, which means everybody knows about it. There's all this extra pressure, and you're having to do lots of fulfillment. And we ended up wearing so many hats across everyone. We had one of the best character 3D artists in the world, for example, boxing up T-shirts one day, and it's just this like crazy way of like you would never ever try and do what we did and make a game at the same time. It was just unbelievable. And it was all these one-offs, so they all contributed to kind of getting in the way of what we really set out to do, and it's just quite focused on making a great game. But we had no other way around it. We'd set out on this course, and we had to brute force our ways and get through it. The good thing is a lot of that stuff is now. It's part of our learnings, part of our history, and it's actually made us stronger going through an experience like that to then be able to focus on the company and build out the company knowing, okay, let's actually have an operations manager to sort out a lot of the stuff that isn't game dev. If it's not game dev, the operations manager can sort it out. Let's let an accountant do our payroll for us and bookkeeping. All these. Yeah. So we're getting back to a situation now where, great, we are now just focusing at wearing one hat and wearing it extremely well, and fleshing out the team and just back to focusing on great games. We still have we've got to go across multiple platforms, but that's one of the easier problems to solve. If I know I do know what we're doing as we're moving ahead, and I look at how we're going to do it, it's just so much more simpler and straightforward, and quality is inevitably going to keep rising and rising. We say whatever game we did last, the next game's got to be better than it. We see ourselves as the past history of ourselves are our rivals, and we have to keep beating them. So I can't wait to show more in future.
Let's go. I want to go a bit more specific on to your job and what goes into being a game director. Because I'd imagine a studio director is obviously just making sure everyone's, for lack of a better word, doing their job or keeping the company running. But game direction, that's like a bit more specific, I would say. Like I'm an outsider looking in, so feel free to tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, I'll just give an insight, because I'm sure it differs from company to company, and you kind of it's like air, you expand into the space that needs filling, kind of. So it's the kind of job that when everybody is pulling in the same direction, your life is very, very easy, and you feel like, oh, I'm redundant. Is this their way of saying I'm not needed anymore? But you're kind of there to help align and keep people pulling in the same direction, really. We even at all levels of the hierarchy, we still get very hands-on. I still go down and get my hands dirty and do the creation of assets, levels, coming up with enemy designs, assisting programmers and helping them iterate on all sorts of features, and writing the design documents for it. But in terms of having, a game's got to come from an initial vision, and it's not the role of the game director, I don't think, to come up with a single vision. It's the role of a game director, I think, to create a single vision and leverage the experience and the skills and the talent of everyone in the studio to help form something that, you think is not only creatively viable, it's got to be commercially viable as well.
Of course.
And so once that initial direction and vision has been set, it's just keeping everyone upheld to that vision, really. But we've got great talent, and everyone at the studio does help mold that initial vision in the first place. We kind of start with more of a business remit for something we've got to do, and it's not just make a game that makes more money than it costs to produce. It's got to be something we think that makes sense for our core audience, our skill set, our IP. So and how we want to grow the business. There's lots of different growth opportunities. We're not just necessarily going to be in the same genre over and over and over. I'm sure there'll be certain genres that we persistently revisit, but we are looking to branch out, and we think we can produce some interesting, unique takes in other genres too. So identifying future proposals for the company as well is something I'm constantly thinking about as well.
Okay, so obviously you've just told us about what goes into that. So what's the hardest part of all that, if there is a particular hard part? It's
finishing a game. Game creation these days is it's so easy to start making a game, really easy to start making a game. It's difficult to finish a game, and it's almost impossible to finish a great game.
Okay.
Right? That's kind of the way I see it. You'll forever want to make it better, but you can't. There's a date coming up. The quality bar is forever being pushed by your contemporaries and your rivals, and new things going off. And so there's this huge influx of game creation going on, but standing out in the crowd now is more important than ever, and actually committing to finishing something and getting out the door. That's why every time it happens, every team should massively celebrate that moment. But obviously you are trying to create a game to a quality bar as well that you're happy with.
So final two questions. This one I'd say is more the biggest one, and more maybe just a bit of advice that people who might be interested in the industry might want to hear as well. And that's, if you had to give one piece of advice to yourself, your past self, what would that be? Or if anyone is interested in game dev, if you had to give any kind of advice to them.
I'd say don't think of it as a goal, think of it as a journey. To become a game developer, to become a great game developer, I hope no one comes wanting to be an average game developer. Everyone wants to be a great game developer. It is a journey. It's not a goal. Don't set your hopes too high too soon. For me, there's a bit of a parallel with people who perhaps want to get fitter and leaner and lose weight, and you see the best results when people set realistic goals, and they don't try and do a quick fix. They create this new way of thinking about fitness and calorie intake for life. It's more like a habit they're trying to change, and it's the same with game development. You're not going to come in, you're not going to make your grandest game ever on your first ever release, and lots of people, they often point to, oh, but this indie game came out from this new company and they just did this one great game and that was it. They were set up for life. And they perhaps don't realize that that company was made from individuals who'd already been making games for other companies for a very, very long time. So accept that it's a journey. Get your foot into the door, work hard every day, look to self-improve all the time. Don't try and think that one day you're gonna peak and it's gonna be, and certainly don't think it's gonna be sooner rather than later. It's gonna be something you have to work at, keep working at that self-improvement forever.
Okay, last question. One I'm a little bit interested in. What do you like? How, outside of, I presume, Rare, do you have any knowledge of like other studios in the East and West Midlands at all?
I have a limited knowledge. Yeah. And,
okay, so out of the studios that you are aware of, what's your favourite one? And Rare is not an acceptable answer.
Okay. Or Playtonic, I guess.
Yeah, because we both know how much you love them.
No. I do have an answer, and it's Bulkhead Interactive. I've been lucky enough to meet the founders a couple of times, and the journey they've been on and the path they've taken is, I think anyone looking to get into the industry should really study what those guys have done. Okay. Coming out of university early on, getting into creating something that had a place in the market and was used to help build their long-term future. They didn't come out and say, right, we're going to make, as many people do, you might think you're going to leave university and make the next Grand Theft Auto. They came out, they created something commercially, critically viable, and they used that success to then build the next bit of success. And if you look at their studio now, they've gone so far in a relatively short space of time, and they've done it just building their experience as they go. I'd say they've done a better job in many regards of Playtonic, and Playtonic's born from a lot of people who have had a lot of experience, but they've really cut their teeth and gone out and built their own journey and built their own experience. And I'd say that's, for me, I find it inspirational. I look at what they do and I think, wow. I'd say anyone looking to maybe get into making their own studio, sure, you could go and work somewhere else for nearly 20 years before picking up the courage. But no, what those guys did straight out of university is amazing and a great example of what can be done.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's all the questions I've got. Thank you ever so much for joining us today. It's been really, really insightful.
No, you're welcome. Pleasure to talk about. I love talking about the games industry. I don't get to do it enough.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, I'm stuck in a household yet where my wife's not really much of a gamer. I'm trying to get my 4-year-old into gaming, so.
I'm sure that'd be very easy.
Yeah, no, it's nice to have these outbursts of time to chat.
Oh, good. Well, then in that case, I'm happy to give you the opportunity.
Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So, isn't it just amazing how much goes into creating, building, and bringing us players the amazing and engaging experiences we get to have every single day? I really, truly do hope this episode has shown to you, our viewers, just what makes the gaming industry so great in the Midlands and what makes gaming so special. So, with that being said, I'm going to go drive around on one of the best racing games from the region I've ever played. And I'll see you all next time by crashing into a wall. Goodbye, everyone.